Hey guys, how are you there? We're really excited to do this butter icing masterclass. The minute I made it called masterclass, I started panicking. As you all know, I'm a home baker, I'm not Donna Hay. And so the whole masterclass word kind of freaked me out a little bit. But I'm definitely going to go through everything I've learned, obviously, in 7 years of doing this. I probably have more tricks up my sleeve than I give myself credit for. So I'm really excited to go through it all with you. I know butter icing is one of those things that that can stress you guys out, and I think the main reason is because there are so many different variables that can happen. It can be the weather at your house, it can be what kind of butter you're using, it can be if you have to use a lot of food coloring in your icing or not, whether you have to ice a 3D shape or a 2D shape. There's lots of different things that can be a variable that are very hard to put every single one of them in a recipe card. So hopefully, as going through everything step by step today will really give you a really strong insight into what are the best tips for you, what's going to work for you, and maybe you'll have a few, as Oprah calls them, aha moments where you're like, ah, that's what she does. So I'm really hoping that's how it's going to go. So I'm actually going to get into this, watch this live on my daughter's phone as well, so that I hopefully can see your responses. Hello Michelle and hello Amanda, and I'm going to keep this here. There's often a little bit of a delay for when a question comes in and when it actually comes up on your Facebook, so I'll try and keep an eye on them, and if you don't see me answer it straight away, I'll come back to it. I've got a few questions that people have already left in the group as well, so we should be all set. It's so funny, I do these every day, as you know, but preparing to do a long session and show you everything has me all a little bit excited and flustered this morning, so I'm really excited to go. So, first things first, let's talk butter, margarine, let's talk all that type of stuff. So, generally, the reason being that there's an issue with butter, margarine, and spreadable butter, for example, is about the structure of the butter itself. So butter itself maintains a really strong structure, and that's why it's hard when it's cold and it's liquid when it melts. Spreadable butters, I've left them in my fridge, hang on. I brought two examples for you. So there's really cheap spread, which to be honest I use a lot for Cake to the Rescue, because when I'm creating new designs and I'm just putting butter into the cakes, I tend to, it's something that, because I can buy it in bulk, I do use. When I come to icing my cake, I actually use spreadable butter, so it's butter much higher quality than this one, but it's just a little bit soft. The main reason for that is because I'm lazy, and I like the fact that it is already slightly soft. However, when things are already soft, it's easier to make them too runny, it's easier to over liquid them because they're already very malleable. Whereas with the butter, it's very stiff, and it's not such a, it can take more colouring, but it also takes a lot more to mix. So I tend to use spreadable butter. What I wanted to talk to you about today is, I think what happens with some people is they forget to take their butter out of the fridge. And so what they do is they take it out of the fridge, they think, I'll just soften it in the microwave. They put it on and they're like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Maybe a kid shouts or screams or carries on, or they kind of look at it and then they take it out. And what it does is it melts. So the top of it's perfect, but it's already started melting from the inside out. So basically what you've done with that, and especially if you get a puddle of liquid, you've destroyed all of the texture, and you've actually made it, if anything, worse than the cheap margarine, because it is so soft, it's lost all of its structure and everything that holds it together. These kind of things have artificial things that hold them together, but butter doesn't. So it's really a huge mistake to microwave your butter, and something you definitely shouldn't do. And quite often with people, you'll actually end up with a puddle in it, not just a squishiness like that. So if you do want to use butter and you've not got it out of the fridge and you can see it's hard here, this is what I call my spreadable butter. What you can do is you can put it into the bowl first and beat it till it's soft. If you were to put the icing in now with the hard butter, that's when people often say my cake mix my icing didn't come together and it looks like breadcrumbs. And no matter what they do, it's then, no matter how much they beat it, the butter's trapped inside the icing and the whole thing doesn't come together. So if your butter is harder, or if you're concerned with it, then you can go ahead and soften your butter. So you can see now that you've softened your butter before you start. And that fixes that thing of having rock hard butter without having this thing of microwaving it and breaking it down from the inside out and liquefying it. So that's a really good idea and a really good way to do that. So, oh, Michelle's had her first aha moment, getting it out of the fridge to soften it, she says. Okay, so that's one option, or you can use the super soft. Like I say, if you're going to make a red fire engine with heaps of food coloring, you might want to use butter over the margarine or the spreader one, because it does have a little bit softness in it already, and the butter will be better for that. Okay, so I think that covers the butter. And hey Jamie, how are you? Hey Kirsten. So I think that covers the butter. Now what I wanted to talk to you about is the next step after you've put in your butter. So the best thing to do is to put in half of the icing first. It's another one of those things that when you put all the icing in, it again can cause breadcrumbs a little bit. It's a bit like it creates globules in the middle, and then the bits to the outside kind of just stick to the outside of those little butter icing balls, and the whole thing doesn't come together. Also, it goes all over your kitchen and all over your face. So if you're one of those people that every time you make our icing, you get covered in icing, you just need to put half in to start off with. So put half in. Okay, silly me forgot to put the milk in, so we will do that too. So I don't have a tablespoon, so I'm going to put in 2 dessert spoons. Sorry about that, I'm nervous. Okay, so you put your 2 dessert spoons or your 1 tablespoon in, and then we mix it together. So as you can see, that's combined really, really well. And now we can put the rest of it in. So as you can see, it's still dry at this stage. Also what happens is the more you mix it, the more you warm it up with the beaters and the more you break it down. You'll see that it starts coming together the more you mix it. That is due to the energy in the beaters and also that you're softening down the icing. So, as you can see at this stage, it is very thick. And I think that's what I say on the recipe card. It is very thick. So, come up to me, yeah? And so, the reason we do this is because you can be doing a myriad of things to this icing. We're going to go through a variety of things that you might be doing. So the first thing is you might be making ivory butter icing because so many of you are making unicorns. So many of you. So, oh, hi Ava, how are you? Hello, Dallin. So, yes, milk, oops, Lynn. No, this is icing mixture. Heather, we always provide icing mixture. We never provide icing sugar. Icing mixture is always a no. That's because it stops it getting lumps in the bag and you don't have to then sift it before you put it in. We never deliver icing sugar. If you were doing it yourself at home, I'd still recommend icing mixture just because it doesn't harden up and you don't have to sieve it. It's one less lazy step. So if you are now making your unicorn and you don't add any color, then clearly this is going to need more milk. And this is the stage at which you would add milk. You would add it 1 tablespoon at a time. Sometimes with the ivory butter icing cakes, where I know that it might not change color, a lot of our cakes have color options, which is why I have to keep the icing dry at the start. But if you've got a ivory rainbow unicorn or that kind of thing, we might have asked you to add 2 tablespoons of milk at the start. You can add them at the start or at the end, but that is at the point that you would be getting the correct consistency. I'm not going to do that right now with this one. I'll show you the consistency soon. So the second thing is if you were adding cocoa powder to make a chocolate cake, a horse or something that was darker, or a black cake which needs liquid and cocoa powder, when you add the cocoa powder, you're adding dry, which means this is going to become even more dry. So with chocolate, it's easy. You put it in, you mix it up, and then once you've got it all in, you then add milk, 1 tablespoon mixing at a time, and that will be your way to see whether it is, to get it the right consistency. If you are making black, you're going to add quite a lot of black food coloring afterwards, which would be the liquid for the milk. So if you're going to make black, you add your cocoa powder, then you add your black food coloring, and once you get it to a point where you're happy with a light black color, then you can decide whether it needs any milk. Chances are it won't need any. So don't panic at the start when things are dry and add lots. And also don't panic and think, oh, I don't want to stuff it and use it like this. Very rarely, almost never, unless you've used margarine like this, will you ever get away with not adding any more milk at the end. So that's a really important tip. Okay, so that's what you need to know about consistency. The next thing I wanted to talk to you about is if you are making like a superhero or something where you have to split the icing into two colors, you again split the icing at this stage. Because if half of it is brown hair, where you add cocoa powder and dry it out, and the other half is going to be red, or for the cape of your superhero, where you're going to add a bucket load of food coloring, the chances are that when you get to the 2 separate ones, you're going to have to add a lot of milk to your brown hair, but you're going to add none to your superhero. One tip I would give you is if you're a person who always feels like you overdo it with your icing, have a spare bag of icing in the house, because if one gets a little bit too runny, you can just add some more icing. So why don't you always have a bag, it's $1.50 or something super, have it in the house, and then you can relax knowing that if you over tip or you do something like that, you can always recover it a little bit. Okay, so that is the next thing to know about coloring. One thing I wanted to then talk to you about is coloring things red or black. So when you color something red, you are never going to get it really, really, really strong red. Let me show you. So I'm going to put half of this icing into a bowl. Where is my spatula? Okay, so I'm going to put some of this icing into a bowl so we can have this conversation about red. So you can see that this is completely unusable icing at this stage. At this stage, it's more like fondant than it is like icing. Okay, so who asked us? Let me have a look. Erin Marmon asked, why does it split? So the reason it splits is when you put so much liquid into it that you actually break down the texture of the butter, and it causes the liquid and the fat in the butter to separate out. Oh, thank you, Tiffany. Okay, so with a lot of our things, we talk about putting drops in and putting a little bit of a time. So if you're doing a middle color, this is the way I do it. I tip it into the lid, and then it allows me to drop it in. I never do this. And the reason I never do this is because I have like a shake, and if I do this and I have a slight shake trying to get it over the edge, you end up with half the bottle in there. So I tend to tip it into the lid and then into here. Okay, now when you're making something red, I might tell you to use no more than 4 teaspoons, but obviously if you've cut your food coloring in, your icing in half to another, then it's less again. So let me get a spoon, in here, put the lid back on my food coloring. If you haven't read the story about me and the green food coloring, go check out the blogs of the day that I covered my entire body in green food coloring just before a party. So I'm going to mix this one up. You can see that because the icing is thicker, it's allowing me to add more color because I haven't added any milk yet. Okay, so I can still comfortably add a lot more. The other thing that you need to be doing at this stage is you are just watching to check that each time you do it, it combines well. If you're a person who is very particular about it being a very rich dark red, then you can go and buy color powder from a specialty shop, and because it is powder and not liquid, it doesn't change the consistency of the icing. However, from Cake to the Rescue's point of view, it costs about $12 for a packet of powder, and I don't think that for you guys with maybe 2 or 3 colors in your kit, you'd appreciate the extra bill. So Cake to the Rescue is really a compromise between the people who are really serious cake decorators and us lot who are just doing our best and want to make our kids happy, which of course they do too, but what I mean is we don't want to spend a lot of money doing it. So this, and as you can see, it's a light pink. It's not a very, very dark, a light red, not a very dark one. This is the kind of color you can expect. When you see it in the bowl and when you see it there, there's a panic that it's not red enough. Always wear your gloves. There's a panic that it's not red enough. But what I can tell you is when you put it next to other colors, like if this was the fire engine, the yellow, the blue thing, it looks darker than it does in this bowl. Also, the bowl reflects into itself. And the other thing that happens is as it dries, it darkens significantly. So this is now a really good consistency. This is actually a fantastic consistency for icing. And you can see that it's still, somebody said, should it slop off the mixers? It still stands upside down. You see that? But you can mix it so easily. I'm not like this. It's nice and smooth. And you can see that when you press it down, you could test it on the side of the bowl. Can you see on the side of the bowl how well it blends and comes off, but it's not sliding? So that is the perfect consistency that you can look for. Okay, so let me see my list. I've written a list of what else I wanted to remind you about. No, that is all the pre-icing. So how does everyone feel about what I've said? Hopefully that part of the icing is good and you can see the type of icing. What we're going to do next is I want to show you one last thing about getting light colors on your cakes. So I'm actually today going to be icing our new hippo. Look, isn't it so cute? Isn't it so cute? So this is the girl version and this is the boy version. And Abby, who's filming at the moment, feels that the girl version should have teeth too. So we may put the teeth in, you can all vote below. Also, it can be a thing where you put them in or you don't put them in. But we're going to be icing this grey. And of course, the grey is an extremely light colour. And so doing light colours is really hard if you're going to try and tip the colour in. It's not going to work really well. So what we suggest you do is use a toothpick, a skewer. If I can't be bothered to go and get a skewer or I've forgotten to get one, I'll sometimes put a fork in there, or I'll just use something else that I can put in there. But what you want to do is go inside and then just wipe it onto the icing. And you want to start with the smallest amount, obviously, and see how you go from there. So, use the noise.
Heather says she uses an eyedropper.
Oh, that's a really good idea, Heather. That's a good idea for when you're doing some parts too. This is also a really good way for doing peach. We see the odd cake from time to time where Peppa Pig's had a bit of a suntan. She's been on holidays to Fiji. So once you can see that that colour's still not enough, you then can add some more. But this is about patience. This is about taking your time and doing a bit at a time and not just sloshing it in. See, I'm losing my patience now because I'm holding you up. Okay, let me get this last bit in because we're actually going to ice this hippo next. Okay, let me get rid of this for you. So the next thing that we're going to do, now that we're finished, is we're going to talk about icing the cake. Let me get all of this out of the way so we don't have any food colouring disasters. And make us some space. Fiona, you've definitely been making it too runny, hey? Making your 4th cake, awesome. Oh, Michelle says hi, Abby.
Hi, Michelle.
Okay, so this is our hippo. The first thing I wanted to say to you, and I think everyone knows this by now, but you would have your cake on this side, you flatten off the top, you flatten off the top of the cake, and then you flip your cake over. You put the template on and you cut round. And this is the top of the cake. Now the reason being is that it's got a stronger surface and now you've only got the sides that are cut and it's much easier. So next, position it on your board. Be really reading the instructions on how you're going to position your cake on your board. Because often there are other sections that have to go on this cake. So for example, when we're making the girl, she can go in the center. We need to make sure there's room for her ears that we're going to add afterwards. But you can see with the boy that we're actually going to add a big bow tie to the bottom. So for the boy, it needs to go further up. So really think about that when you are making your cakes. The next thing is that you want to start with a clean board. Yeah, so if you put it on the cake and you get a whole lot of crumbs on the board, then chances are those crumbs are going to end up in your icing. So take the crumbs off your board. Another tip is we often bake the cake the night before, and that way the cake has had chance to settle. You can even cut the shape out the night before, and then the edges will have strengthened up a bit overnight. It's not like the whole thing's gone stale, it's just a firming of the edge, which will make it easier to ice. Unfortunately for me, I just made these cakes about an hour and a half ago. I cooled them down about an hour and a half ago, and they're still very soft. So we'll get to see how I go with the icing. Okay, let me put this milk away. So I'm just going to have a check on the texture of this icing because I made it a while ago and I left it out a bit. Okay. I'm going to add a little bit more icing sugar to it because it's been sitting on the bench for a while. If ever you do that, just sift the icing, don't shove it in like I just did. All right, as you can see, the icing doesn't tip off the spatula, but it spreads beautifully on the sides. Can you see the difference? Look at this one. This thicker one and this one here. Okay, so you want to look at your cake and the first thing you want to do is cover the top of the cake. You don't want to start with the sides. So the first thing I do is I put a big splodge of icing in the middle. Probably about half of the icing or a little bit less. Okay. Why do I do that? I do that because it's not about spreading like buttering bread like this, which will bring up the crumbs. You don't actually want your knife to put any pressure onto the cake. So by putting this big lump and you push towards the outsides like this, you've already, in how many seconds was that? 5 seconds? You've already roughly covered the top of the cake. Yeah? And you don't have a single crumb. Now, did everyone see how ridiculously easy that was? By putting a great big lump in the middle and pushing it out, I never actually went near the crumbs at all. In fact, there was almost no chance of any crumbs ending up on that cake. Okay, so that is my number one tip. Obviously, you can then thin it out once it's kind of attached, and because you'll need some of the icing in the sides, but basically you want to push it, I don't know if Abby can see that it's not quite falling off the edges. Sometimes it does if I'm rushing, but you can see that it's kind of very close to the edge, and you can see how fast that was at getting done. So that is tip number one. Now the sides of the cake, and another good thing to know is, actually everyone's only looking at the top of the cake, yeah? So if you get a few crumbs in the side, is anyone really going to notice? You know, no one thinks that we're celebrity bakers. Nobody thinks that we're some kind of master chef. If the top looks great, everything else you can kind of get away with. Okay, so now I'm going to take a little bit on the end here. It's always a little bit tricky because I'm trying to see and let you see. But what I do is I roll it over the edge and I move it backwards and forward, but you can see it was still a big lump. And then I push the icing from the top. And so one of the other things that always causes trouble is this bit. But because we pushed it off the side, you can see that it's not a problem. So we do this other one here. And you put it round here. So the other thing I wanted to say to you is a lot of people will try an ice like this or like this. Just keep rotating the board. You know when you're teaching a child to use scissors and you say to them, move the paper, not the scissors? It's the same with your icing. Move the cake, not you. So that you're always in your ideal spot and you can visually always see where you want to go. Mine never has spread like that either. Yeah, I think it's about getting the perfect texture, Jamie and Kayleen. It's definitely about making sure that you do add that extra milk at the end once you've got the color right. So again, I'm coming round and flattening. As you can see, these palette knives are awesome. You can either buy them for $10.95 on the site, or I think there's an offer on the site at the moment. It was our fondant rolling pin, but I think at the moment it's a palette knife. And you can sign up for our newsletter and you get the palette knife for free with your order. You don't have to put the palette knife into the cart like some of those Shopify sites. You just literally use the coupon code and we'll take care of the rest. So you only have to be able to see that the coupon code's there. Okay, do you see what happened there? That it kind of came away from me, and you see there's a couple of crumbs there. What I would do is I would take them with the thing and get rid of them. I will clean my knife so that the bits with the crumbs are not there, and then I'd get some clean and I'd put the clean over the top. Yeah? So I don't try to go back over the mistake I've done with the icing that already has the crumb in it. Does that make sense? Again, I'm going to drop it from the top over the side so that I don't get that weird edge. So at this stage, you can see that it's not very well defined where my hippo is, but I don't worry about it at this stage, because if I go in there and try and carve out that special spot now before the icing is stuck, it'll probably come away on my knife, and that's how I'll end up with crumbs. At the moment, my only focus is getting every single crumb of cake hidden with icing. How the whole thing looks, how perfectly the shape is not something you deal with at this stage, and that's often what causes people to get crumbs. So you can see now it's completely covered, and proud to say, not a crumb in sight. You know how nervous it is when you're the one doing it live and you're not Donna Hay. Even Donna Hay doesn't do it live. So I am absolutely delighted with that. So now you've got the cleanup stage of it, now that you've got this whole top thing. So the first thing I would do is, it's almost like I now just run my way around the cake. The other thing is because it's had time to stick on the whole cake, it's had time to absorb into the sponge, which means it's much more forgiving as you go around. As you can see, I'm just making big sweeping moves in one direction. I'm not scrubbing at all. And I'm just coming right round and I'm removing the excess. Still got that funny bit there, which we'll deal with soon, that we have to link in a little bit. But you can see that that's the sides of the cake. Pretty smooth now. Okay, so now for the top of the cake. Now, some people really like a smooth cake. They want it to look like an ice skating rink. And that's not the way that, hey Bronwyn, that's not the way I think is necessarily the best way to do it, because of the pressure it puts you under. You know, if you've got an absolutely perfect field of snow and there's one footstep in it, you won't see the 99% perfect snow. All you'll see is the footprint. And so by trying to get something perfect like that, you're actually setting yourself up for it to look way worse than it would if you kept it rough, unless you can get it immaculate. There was one lady in the group, she made Steve, I've forgotten who it is, she buys from us all the time, and she told me that she spent 2 hours glossing it, filling in gaps, and everyone's like, how did you get your icing that way? But she spent 2 hours on it. And so for me, I like to keep the texture. Also, because a lot of our cakes are characters, texture works really well. So I want to show you what I mean by that. So here is our hippo. Hopefully I can come down and show the hippo. As you can see, you've got this part of the head, and then you've got this big round nose. And you really need to define it. You know, if we left this like this, or we even flattened it, it wouldn't look like that hippo should look, if you see what I mean. So, there's two ways to do it. Being me and that I've been doing it so long, I'd probably do it by eye. But you can also kind of lay your hippo on top. Whoop. Draw a little round, and then you get an idea of roughly where it's supposed to be. So I probably will now use my little palette knife, which is a cupcake palette knife. We sell them on the site too. But also I often talk about butter knives, which is basically just a dinner knife. And a dinner knife is fine too. They're really very little difference. But if you like gadgets, cupcake knife. So then for this one, what I would do is for the top section, I want to say, well, that's one section, and this is a rounded hippo, and this is the top of its head, which is rounded. So I would generally make it look this rounded shape. Can you see how that works? So I've kind of said the top of my hippo is this round shape, yeah? If you were doing hair, let me show you hair. If you were doing a fringe, you might do this, and then this. And then your hippo looks like it's got hair. If you were doing a bun on a ballerina, or you're doing a lion's mane, you might do it like this. And that would be how a lion's mane would, and then you'd put the face in fondant in the middle. So can you see how the texture and the way that you shape it lets people know what the shape of the things, and it makes it feel more three-dimensional. So for this hippo, I'm just going to go back to making it go all the way around. And it's sort of saying this is one section of the cake. Now I'm just going to tidy that off. And that's me defining one section of it. So the next thing then I'm going to do is I'm going to say, okay, here is my hippo's. Sorry, I've let this dry off a little bit. Let me use the big one. So now I'm going to say, here is my hippo's snout. And my hippo's snout is this kind of shape. And it's letting people know that I've got this rounded shape on my hippo, and that where its nose stops. You can also even push the icing so you create like a little edge. And then just move it in a circular fashion. So you can see that you've defined two separate parts of your hippo. That's also a really good thing when you're doing long hair and a dress. So you might do the dress like this, and then the hair in a wavy way. And the same with the superhero, you put the fringe on, but then the cape is a downward stroke. So that's a really good tip for it. For these little corners where you want to go in, a butter knife is really good for that. And it's probably the thing you should do last, because now that it's stuck, see how it's allowed me to go in and create that dent, and it's more forgiving. So defining shapes, especially on your llama cakes. Lots of people buying llamas. I made the llama because everyone said llamas, and then everyone's carried on ordering rainbow unicorns, but everybody's ordering llamas now. Okay, so you can see that that allowed me to get more of that dent. Another trick is that once the cake's dry, and I even do this after decorating every part. So in other words, when I'm finished all the fondant and everything else, because then the cake's super dry, you can see it's still a little bit wet. I go around the entire edge with my heel of my hand and just create that really smooth edge. So you've still got all that nice texture, but you've created a smooth edge on it. The other thing you can do is once this is set, you can actually kind of shove your finger in here and show that dent even more with your finger. And the same in that side. And can you see that that gives you much more definition on all of that? Let me wash my hands. Okay, how's everyone going? My 2-year-old is engrossed. Hey, how are you? Okay, now I want to show you about cleaning your board. So I think some people use baby wipes. And that gets it, they really like that. I don't like to use anything wet because I think wet things smear. And I also think that some wet things can make the color from the icing puddle as colored water puddle, or sometimes even leave like a cloudy color on your icing. So all I do is I have paper towel, I fold it up really thin, and then I drag it with quite a force of pressure around the cake. Once it's built up on my finger like that, I just turn the paper over and I make myself another corner and I go in right around the edge. I do this now. Some people clean their board at the end. I don't like that because I think it's just another opportunity for me to get you know, to dirty my fondant up because my board's dirty. So I like to clean as I go along and make sure that every step that I take during the process is getting clean. So there you go. And then what I do for the entire board, this is so funny, Kate. Okay, so then what I do is, because I don't have to go near the edge of the cake anymore because I've removed that round, I go around the board and I'm literally polishing it. Now I do it at this stage and then I do it again at the end. So I'm shining up my board. I know we're all about, you know, the love's all that counts, and I totally get that. But gosh, taking a couple of seconds to clean your board, the impact it has on the way your cake looks. I often think if your board's dirty, it looks like you were stressed making it. Whereas if your board, you know, like when people are coming over and your house is a trash heap, and then 5 minutes before they arrive, you all run around like maniacs and somehow you look like this in control human being. That's what cleaning the board is. It's like it takes away the stress that has been prior because everything looks shiny and clean. Nothing better than a clean board, Belinda. Totally. 2 pages of notes, Fiona. Oh my Lord. I'm actually looking at, you had a question from me, Fiona. How to get a smooth finish. So Fiona, we can also do a smooth finish. I'll talk about how it's done and what people do. There's a variety of different ways that people do it. Let's trash this little guy for a minute and see you. So don't come over here, Abby. It's really messy. Wait till I come back. Okay, so I'm just warming up some hot water that we can use, that some people use as a technique to get a flat surface on their icing. Okay, so there's a few different ways that people do this. So obviously you need to get the surface as smooth as you can as a starting point. What's really good about the long blade of this is that you can drag in one long movement. Do you see that? Drag in one long movement. Now already, because I've tried to make this smooth, I've got a crumb in my icing there. Do you see that there? So I'm gonna dig that out and put some more fresh icing on top. Again, you can smooth it out. And it's like applying a gentle pressure. And you want to come at it from the whole end every time. You don't want to come from the middle because you're just going to make yourself a thing. So you kind of glide until you get to the next bit and drag it off. And then of course you have to go around the sides and do everything else. I won't do that right now, but you can see now that it's a little bit smoother and it's come sort of to that point there. Now what some people will do is then they won't be happy with these bubbles. So they'll go in and they'll fill in the bubbles, these little holes, and they'll go again and again and again. Again, this probably is a great one for using this technique at the end. But can you see that this hippo no longer has a personality because I made it smooth? So that is one way of doing it. The other thing people do, but this is something that you're supposed to do once you let it sit for a little while. And so now that I've freshened it up, it's probably not going to work as well. But what people do is they lay a piece of baking paper on, and we have a fondant smoother, also available on the website. And fondant smoothers are really designed for when you put fondant over a whole cake and you want to push out and smooth it, and you can run it around the edges. But you can use it. And I've no idea if this is going to stick to the cake because we've not been able to keep the, we've not been able to let the icing set, but some people do it this way. Another thing you could do to do it that way is you could use a lid of a piece of Tupperware and go around that and just hold it lightly by the edge and use your Tupperware to do it. How cute are those containers? Whew. And so that's another way you can do it. Now, obviously, I'm going to take this off and it's all going to stick, and you're going to say that was useless, but it's because our icing was too thick. But at least you can see what our icing wasn't set yet, but you can see the technique with it. So basically, it's about letting that icing set and doing that. So that is the other way. However, from my perspective, and in my humblest opinion, I honestly believe that as a character cake that you're making, that you want to have a personality, I firmly believe that this finish here, which was really quick and doesn't show any crumbs at all, is a much cuter, much more believable hippopotamus than the one that you just saw. So in my opinion, I wouldn't make them smooth. So one last one. Another request we've been getting recently is for a bus. And so since I had to ice the 3D cake today, I thought we might as well make a start on this bus. So with three-dimensional cakes, you can see you have a lot more crumb and a lot more reasons to stuff up, I guess. For that reason, I don't think you should make your 3D cakes out of chocolate mix. I know your kids love chocolate cake, but if it was me, I wouldn't be doing it. I'd be suggesting them that they can have a layer of Nutella in the middle, you know, that joins the two layers, but I would not, for me, be having chocolate cakes, especially things like the Digger, and there's certain cakes that are just, and if it's going to be ivory and 3D, it just leads to tears. So if it was me and you're doing a 3D cake, I'd say, yep, you can have that one, darling, but that one needs to be a vanilla one. That's just my opinion of it. What you can also do if you're adamant about having chocolate, you could skim coat it. We don't send enough icing to skim coat a cake. The reason being is that it's an extra ½ kilo in weight. It's an extra $1 in icing, but it's an extra $7 to post it to you. And I just don't think everyone wants to pay an extra $7 on their kit for the sake of perfection. And so a lot of the choices that I make are about a compromise between you guys getting something that's value for money and something being really perfect. And that's really what those choices kind of come down to. So I have to just quickly make this blue butter icing. So I'll start making the icing. You can see it's with this thicker one. What I wanted to talk about is people often ask what you can put in the center of your cake when you're doing it, or can I cut the cake in half and put stuff in it? What I would say is that if you've got something in the middle that's wobbling and you're trying to ice it, it's going to make you cry. And also if you put cream or anything in it, you've got an issue for keeping it in the fridge or what you need to do it. So if it was me, I'd just put the icing. You could put some jam and icing, or you could put some Nutella or something like that, but not a big fat layer of frosting or ganache or anything that's going to make your whole cake wobble. I wouldn't recommend it. Okay, you can see that this icing is still too thick. It's not the fact that we it's not the fact that we can tip the bowl upside down. It's the texture of it. You can see that it's still kind of a little bit grainy. Oh, she says as she pushes it down, and it looks perfect. Okay, so you can see as you mix it now, this is really the test, this side of the bowl test. You see this test? I think that's really, if it spreads on the side of the bowl, but it's not slopping, and it's holding to your spatula, then that's good. The other thing is if you put it on your cake, the first bit you put on pulls up your cake, then stop right there, and don't think, well, I have to use this icing now. just go back and add a tiny little bit of milk to the rest of it. So test the first part, and if that's not working for you, then you can do that. So again with this one, oh, let me just pop a little bit of icing in the middle. I'll do it with this one for just now. You can use your own icing to do it. I'm just wanting to think it. So for me, I don't put a lot on here because I don't want it to splosh around. I literally just put a really rough, tiny little amount. I don't worry about it looking all perfect and wobbly on the sides. And put this baby back on. Again, this cake is prone to crumbing, so I'm constantly wiping the crumbs away from my board. Okay, so I'm going to start with the top of the cake. And again, I'm going to ice to the edges. You can see that these cakes wobble, the 2D cakes, they get a bit of a wobble on them. So I just put my thumb on the back, and that kind of anchors me down. Oh, I've just realized one thing. We stole half of this icing to make the red for the video, so there's not going to be enough icing to ice the whole cake. But at least I can kind of show you how to do it. So again, all of your issues around this cake, as we know, I've not got that quite flush. All your issues around this cake are going to be with these crumbs. So again, it's the same thing, the same principle. You want to push it off the sides, and you also want to leave it really, really thick. Okay? So what I mean by that is I don't mean you want the icing to be really thick texture. What I mean is you don't want to be trying to make this bus look like a bus until the very last minute. At the start, it's just about getting rid of all the crumbs, especially on corners. Corners are always tricky. Another good thing to know is that a lot of these cakes have quite a lot of fondant on them, and fondant also hides a myriad of tricks. So these corners, do you always find that these corners, that last cake was circular, but these corners can be a nightmare. So again, the same thing. You're pushing it towards the corner. You can see that this came off, so I'm going to wipe it away and put some more on. And I'm going to leave it thick so that it has time to absorb and sit. I'm going to come halfway down the cake. Like that. You can see I got a bit of thing there, so I'm cleaning up first. Sorry, I've got the challenge that we just used all the icing to make the red, but you'll get to see a rough idea of what I'm talking about. So you can see that you just slowly work your way down. Once it's on here, you know that you can then come back and take some more icing like that. Okay, so you can see at least we've done the side and the front. So can you see that on that corner I left this massive big lump? That's because the corners always crumble the most. So what you do is once the whole thing's been done, that is the point where you can come and now, because you know it's sticking, you can now remove it. But at the start, it is better just to leave it as one big fat lump. Also, don't go round the bend. This is a crumbling corner. If you go around the bend, you'll thing it. So the best thing to do is to come like that, and then come from the other corner and go like that. So you've never touched that corner, and you've never given that crumbly corner an opportunity to go. Again, the same with the top. Press down and push away from it. Push down and push away from it. In here. Take the edge off. And you can see that this whole corner looks really good. Alrighty, so thank you, Kirsten. I really think the reason it looks easy is because of the texture of the icing. And it is because everyone's trying to make a different color, and some people are using butter and some people are using margarine and different things. So I did see someone, because I know you've been having some 40-degree days, I saw someone who'd strapped ice bags to their butter icing. Do you know what I mean? The flexi ones that you use for your knees. And that was really smart because it did keep her icing really thin. I obviously try and keep the whole house in aircon while I'm doing it. And I know that's not as easy for other people. But definitely this icing bag drying. But realistically, when it comes to cake making, you need aircon in the hot summer. You really can't do it in 40-degree heat with a fan. So if you don't have aircon at your house, it might be worth making it at someone else's, or, you know, even at nighttime it can be really hot in the summer. But I hope that helps. So let's go through the summary of it. Butter. You never want to put your butter in the microwave. Even if you leave it on the bench and you've left it a bit too long and it's a bit too soft, it's a bit of a disaster. It's almost better to take the butter out of the fridge and beat it to the softness that you want it, rather than let it sit on the bench and half of it's liquid, or you didn't leave it quite long enough, or you left it too long. Again, spreadable butter is not a bad compromise. It's something I use a lot, but if you're gonna make red or black, or you're gonna try and get it really deep in color, butter would be better, or you'll need a lot less milk with this. This one here, it really does break down the texture a massive amount. It doesn't hold its shape, and so therefore it's probably okay for doing an ivory butter icing because you're not really adding much milk, and you might find that you don't even need any milk. Also, for people who are doing dairy-free, when you use Nutlex is like this. So you'll probably find you need no milk at all, and you may need to add more icing afterwards. So always have some icing free if you're doing a dairy-free, because you may need some more icing, because Nutlex just doesn't hold its texture in the same way. All right, with your food colorings, as we said, you keep it really, really thick. Don't worry about how thick it is. You put half of the butter in, the 1 tablespoon of milk, and all the butter, 1 tablespoon of milk, and half the icing, and you combine all of that first. That's going to give you that base and make everything hold together. Then you put the rest of the icing in. And that also stops you getting covered in flour. At that point, you still do not worry about the texture. This is going to be really thick, which is going to allow you to add color. If you're adding a really heavy color, like a red or a black, chances are you won't need milk at the end. If you're doing ivory, you're going to have to add milk straight away then. If you're adding cocoa powder for chocolate, it's going to dry your cake, your icing out, which means you'll need more milk than average as well. If you're going to do light colors, like you want a baby blue, or you want a peach, or you want a gray, then use your stick to just dab small amounts of color in, especially if you're trying to, it's also a good trick if you're trying to match icing to fondant. When we say make it grey similar to the fondant that was sent to you, it's a lot easier to achieve that with a skewer. So that's your next tip. Then when you come to icing your cake, make sure your board is clean and free of crumbs. Make sure you flip the cake over so that the hard surface is on the top. Put a great big pile, half of the icing in the middle, and push it over the top so that your top of your cake never stood a chance of getting crumbs in it, so that it's just sitting near the edge. Then scoop and go around the sides, one bit at a time in one direction, coming from the top and folding over the edge. I believe in keeping your cakes textured because I think they have more character. But if you were doing like the number cake where you're doing a number 1 with a gymnast or thing, and I understand you want it smooth, long sweeping slopes, definitely having a palette knife is good. Some people dip them into water, dry the water off and then do it. Personally, I don't like that at all because I think that the water tends to puddle and it tends to go into the surface. So the other option is to let your cake sit for a while, make it as smooth as you can, and then go over with the baking paper and the smoother. But you must have already let your icing sit for a while before you do that. Alrighty guys, I think that is everything. You saw my little trip on the corners. I hope you've enjoyed this. I hope it's really going to help everybody and you've all had some aha moments with it. And yeah, leave me a comment and let me know what was the thing that you learned the most. We'll obviously be turning it off, but it'll come back up as a replay straight away, and I'd love you to leave a comment in there or leave a comment now before you leave and let me know what was your biggest learning from this, and if there's anything else you would like to know. All right, guys.
Before we go, Belinda and Kate said that their icing always goes everywhere and they love your bowls. So where's your bowls from?
Oh, well, these are really big bowls. This is just the bowl from my mixer. This is actually a giant set of 3 that my mother-in-law brought. It's called a Breville bowl, but they're just really big bowls. I suppose they're just a massive bowl. I think a normal bowl is kind of like this size. Oh, these are the Tupperware bowls. But can I tell you, I think I've had them 20 years. But these are big Tupperware bowls. So yeah, you can see that's probably an average bowl size, and these are much bigger bowls. But anywhere, any of the shops have the bigger bowls. They're nothing fancy or posh at all. I think my mother-in-law bought me these for my wedding, and we've been married 21 years. So, all right, guys, so nice to see you. Thanks everyone for joining in. Really appreciate it. Love to you all, and I will see you in the private group. Oh, and I'll be back to you with our new bus and our new hippo. I'm so excited. All right, see you guys. Thanks for joining us.